If you've checked out the new Quantec Room Simulator plugin here in Logic Pro for iPad and thought to yourself, that looks pretty complicated, yeah, you're not alone. But the good news is, in this video, I'm going to break down every single option and get you up to speed with how to use this amazing plugin. Let's go. So what is the Quantec Room Simulator? Well, as the name suggests, it simulates the sound of a room. It's a digital reverb plugin, but the cool thing is it's based on an original piece of actual hardware. And if you want to learn all about it, you can tap on the Quantec logo there and read all about the inventor and the original piece of hardware, because what Apple have done is that they've licensed and made a digital plugin version that you can use in your Logic projects. Now, if you're looking for a quick introduction to the plugin, you can check out the other video linked up there and in the description. In that one, I jump in here to the features lessons and I actually go through the whole Quantec Room Simulator lesson. It won't be as in-depth as what we're doing here in this video, but it's a good way to get some hands-on practice if you'd like to check that out. How do we add the plugin? The first way is to add directly to a track. So I've got my vocal track selected here in this project. I'm going to tap on the plugins button, and over here on the right, I'm going to tap Add Audio FX. Now, I've recently used it, so it's in my recent list there, but if it's your first time, scroll down to Reverb and then tap on the Quantec Room Simulator. Here you'll have access to some of the basic functions of the plugin, but the best way to get access to everything is to double tap and open up the full plugin interface. The other way, and perhaps the best way to use this plugin, is to add it as a send. To do that, I've selected this guitar track and I'm going to tap on the mixer icon. Here's that guitar track in the mixer. I'm going to come up here to where my sends are and hit the plus button. I'm going to tap on bus and create new bus. And you can see that a brand new track over here called Aux2 has been created. What I can now do is tap here to rename, tap rename, and I'm going to call it Quantec. And now if we scroll up here, we can actually add the audio effects to this bus. So I'm going to tap and tap on the Quantec Room Simulator. And what this has done is created an aux channel with just the Quantec Room Simulator. The good thing about this is you can see here that bus 4, this guitar is now being sent to, and I can turn this up to add as much or as little as I want. I can then hit the plus button here on other channels and send them to this same bus 4, the Quantec bus, and therefore I can have all of my different tracks going into this one plugin and all sound like they're in the same room. Let's now tap on the plugins button to go back to our plugin view, and once again double tap to go back here to our Quantec Room Simulator, and you can resize these or even completely remove the mixer there if you want more space. There are two different models of the Quantec that you can use here, the original Quantec QRS and the Quantec Yardstick. They're similar but have some different features, so we are going to cover them separately, but if we use presets, it will choose between one of these two, which is what we're going to dive into now. Now, before we dive into the presets and all the settings, let's just take a listen to this vocal before we do any processing. So I'm going to hit the power button here to turn off the Room Simulator, and let's take a listen. Don't need no garages on my launch pad. So I've got a nice sort of crunchy, distorted vocal here, but it's very dry. Let's use some presets here to see if we can make it sound a bit cooler. Now, keep in mind, this is the plugin that we added directly to the vocal track. So we're here in the track view, and in plugins, we're going to double tap. And then to access our presets, we can tap here where it says default preset. And here you've got a heap of options: small, medium, and large room, QRS classics, and even some warped rooms to play with. To use a plugin, all you need to do is tap the drop down. You'll get a whole bunch of different options here, and if we choose one like this live room, you'll see here that it's actually changed over to the Quantec Yardstick. Let's take a listen to what these settings have done. Don't need no garages on my launch pad. So you can hear there it's creating that thicker sound of a live room. If you wanted to go with something bigger, let's go up to a large room now and go with something like a cavern. Don't need no coffee for my cream, no, none for me. And you hear that you're getting a whole lot more size and reverberation going on there. Let's try one more. This time I'm going to dive into the QRS classics, go into some loudspeakers, and what about an empty concert hall? Don't need no hodges on my head, buzz. Sometimes you can hear you're getting a lot more reflections and a lot more of a sort of empty, vacant space. So this is a great way to just try out some different sounds, and you may find you don't even need to learn what all these dials do. But I know many of you want to know how to tweak those sounds, so let's dive into that now. Let's now close the plugins in the bottom left by tapping that one, and you'll see that we now have access to all of these features. We're going to use this vocal on the track to show you all of the features of the QRS, and then we'll do the same with the Yardstick as a bus for the guitar. Now, there's a lot of options here you can play with, but the most important ones are the reverb time and the room size. This is going to control the majority of your sound. So the reverb time here is in seconds, and you can dial that down or up to have a shorter or longer reverb, and the room size can be adjusted to larger or smaller. And what you'll notice there is as we turn the size up, we can actually add more longer reverb times. It makes sense, doesn't it? The bigger the room, the more reverb you can get. So let's take a listen to this giant room with a big long reverb tail. Don't need no people asking questions. And if we want the room to be really small and just a quick kind of slap back delay, we can do that too. Take my own advice, it always sets me straight. Now, as well as being able to be used as a standard reverb plugin, there's also two other modes, freeze and enhance. And that's what these buttons here are all about. Let's show you that now. To demonstrate the freeze function, I've got a nice long reverb in a large room here. What I'm going to do is hit play. On the last word of this, I'm going to hit the freeze, and then you'll hear what actually happens here. I got a lot to learn. And as you can hear there, it's frozen that final note in place. This is great if you want to create some sort of atmospheric sounds and some drones using the sounds that you have, but just capturing and freezing that reverb in place. Using the add function, we can add multiple different sections of audio and create some overlapping reverb that can make it sound pretty crazy. And I know I got a lot to learn. Not for the faint-hearted. If you don't like what you've added there, just hit the clear button. And finally, we have the enhance button. When we tap on this one, you'll notice it turns off all of the other options. And what it creates instead, and I'm reading this straight from the manual, it creates a dense reflection cluster, adding spatial depth. So let's take a listen to what that sounds like. And I know. So it's much more of like a tight sound, and it's really more like a compressor is the way I'd look at this if you're using the enhance mode, but you don't get those nice reverb tails, but it's an interesting option to play with if you want to. Before we dive into all of this business in the middle, you'll notice that we've also got an in and an out meter. So that's just going to show you the audio level coming in and going out. So you can keep an eye on that. Make sure you're not overloading or clipping your signal. As I play, just watch these meters on the right. I got a lot to learn. Okay, this next section, the reverb time multiplier, is probably one of the most challenging to understand, so stick with me. You'll notice here that when we turn the reverb time up and down, this will actually change the number of seconds that we have here. So what we're talking about here is the reflections and some additional reverb in the high frequencies or the low frequencies. Let's give you an example. Let's just say we wanted a really bright, reflective sounds. What we do is turn up the high frequencies and turn down the low frequencies. Let's take a listen to this audio. Don't need no people asking questions. And you hear you're getting those frequencies up the top end a lot more. Now, if we want to do the opposite, if we want a really dark kind of reverb, we can go the other way around. Let's take a listen. I take my own advice, it always sets me. So you can hear it's changing the way that those reflections and that reverb is actually happening. Now, probably the easiest way to learn this is to play with some presets and see where it puts those for the different types of rooms, and then you'll get a feel for how this actually works. Let's jump over to the right-hand side here. First, you'll notice we have primary and secondary. We're going to focus on primary for now. The first setting there, room size, we've already been through. So this is going to adjust not only the size of your room from 1 square meter right up to like a a 10 by 6 meter room, but it's also going to adjust how long your reverb time can be. The bigger the room, the longer the reverb. So set that to set your room size. Next is the first reflection delay. Now, by turning this up, we're going to get a space between the original sound and when that first reflection comes back from the wall of our virtual room. So if we turn this up, you'll hear that there's a delay built in to that reverb. I got a lot to learn. So you're hearing the lur. So that first delay there. Next up is the reverb delay, which is similar, but this is for the overall reverb. So if we want those multiple reflections to have some delay, we can create a much more kind of ambient room noise here. And on the right side here, we have 3 basically volume sliders or gain adjustments here. So the dry level, this is how much of the original sound, apart from the reverb, is going in. So what we'll do is I'll play this and I'll turn the dry level down so that you hear what happens. Don't need no people asking questions. You can hear there that with the dry level down, we're not hearing much of the original sound, we're hearing a lot of the actual reverb. And this is actually cool because if we turn the volume to mute, you can hear what just the plugin is doing without the original sound. Really good for checking exactly what you're doing. You've also got a volume adjustment here for the first reflection, as well as your overall reverb level. So you can have complete control over each of these, your original room sound, the size of the room, that first reflection and how much of that's going into your mix, and then the overall delay there and how much of that's going into your mix. So just some trial and error here will get you the sound you're looking for. If we tap on the secondary button here, we've just got one option. Now this is pretty cool because we can actually swap the right and the left to left and right. So if you're creating like a stereo reverb delay, changing those channels can actually create some kind of funky sounds if you want to experiment with that. I take my own advice, it always sets me straight. We're now going to cover the Quantec Yardstick. The good news here is if you've absorbed as much of that last section as possible, this is going to be pretty simple because a lot of these options are very similar on the Yardstick. But for this one, I want to show you the other way of using this plugin, which is using a bus. Now you'll recall that earlier in this video, I actually showed you how we can set this up by coming in here to our mixer and adding it as a bus. So what I'm going to do now is grab this bus 4 dial and turn it all the way up to the top till it's right up to its maximum. So that means that all of this guitar track is being sent out to bus 4, which is this one over here, this Quantec channel at the end here. If we scroll on up, you can see there is the QRS. To access this, we just tap on it and tap show details. And here we go. We can now use this to change all of the settings that we want to, and it's going to affect that guitar track as well as any other tracks that we wanted to send to this aux bus. So just to make sure everything's working correctly, let's turn it off, hit the play button, and then turn it on with the default preset. Yep, working well. So this time we're going to be exploring the Quantec Yardstick. So we're going to tap on the Yardstick button. Your reverb time and room size work in exactly the same way. Again, the smaller the room, the lower the maximum reverb time. And if we extend that room to make it larger, we can actually add more of the feedback time there on the reverb. So let's listen to this with a large room and a long tail. Oh yeah. Now, as mentioned, you've already learnt about freeze, add, and clear. You've already learnt about the reverb time multiplier, and you've actually already learnt about all of these options here in the primary section. So we are going to skip over those and jump straight into the additional options you have with the Yardstick. The first difference you'll notice is this one. We've got this mode button instead of the enhance button. So by tapping that, we've got complex, medium, and simple mode for the reverb. And these just are exactly what they sound like. If you want a very simple kind of sound, you can drop that down to simple. And then you can choose medium for something a little bit more intense. and the default is back at complex. Now, I did say that all of these were the same, but one thing you will notice here is that we have this reverb density here that goes anywhere from 0 to 200%. This replaces the first reflection because the secondary option here lets us do a whole bunch related to that first reflection. So let's just look at the reverb density and then we'll jump into those secondary controls. So ordinarily you want your density at 100 or lower. You can push it up here, but you do run the risk of getting some kind of metallic sounding sounds if you make the room too unnatural. But for this kind of sound, it's actually worked quite well. Okay, let's jump into secondary and go through each of these options. Now, once again, we've got this, the first reflection delay, but this time we've also got the first reflection spread. So this actually controls the stereo width, the left and right balance of your sound. So let's play this back and go all the way down and all the way up. It's usually a good way to see what something sounds like. So it's pretty subtle, but it's just moving that sound a little bit there as well. Next, we have a high cut filter for our reverb. So if we dial this down, we can actually cut it off. So let's just say we wanted a nice sort of warmer sound with nothing over about 4 kilohertz. We can turn that one on. And now instead of those sort of harsher reflections, it'll be a warmer, rounder, darker kind of sound. And you'll hear as I turn it back up, you hear those higher frequency sounds coming through. Next up, we have our bass gain and bass crossover. So what I do first here is set your bass crossover frequency, as this will be which actual frequencies below that are controlled by this bass gain. So if you wanted everything under, say, 160 or 250 even hertz, we can now control the bass gain with this. So if we want more bass in our reverb, we can turn it up, less, turn it down. Let's show you. So it gives you complete control over what frequencies are part of that reverb, which can really change up the sound. And finally, your reverb correlation. Now, this is similar to that spread that we did with the first reflection, but for the overall reverb. So again, we can go up to 0.5 or down to minus 0.5. Let's give this a play and move it and see what happens. So pretty subtle, but you can definitely hear that the separation there on this. And look, it will depend on the different tracks you're using, if it's a more stereo or a more mono track, but it can create some cool depth and width in your sounds. And yes, we also have an extended button. So we've got a lot more options here on the Yardstick model. It is the newer model. So let's take a look at these options now and what they do. Once again, you have your dry source here. So you can either swap this to go right, left, or leave it as your left, right. And you can independently change from the dry source as well as this, your first reflection. So you can have it come out as left, right from the original sound, switch over to right, left if that's what you wanted to go for. And now we're getting into some pretty complex stuff. This is the correlation pattern for the microphones that are recording the virtual reverb. Yeah, we're right down here in the hole, folks. So if we tap this one, you can choose from any of these options. It's going to be a bit of a trial and error kind of thing for these ones, because I'll be very honest with you, I just read about what this meant in the manual and I still don't really understand it, but play around with it, see what happens. And finally, at the bottom here, the subsonic button. Now, this is off by default, and with this one off, it will filter out those inaudible low frequencies, so you're not getting that rumble or that low-end build-up. If you do want that, though, you can turn it on. I'm not sure why you would, but it's there if you need it. Now, that's a lot, and as I mentioned, most folks won't touch a lot of these. In fact, a good way, as I mentioned before, to learn about this is to jump in here and check out some of the presets that we have here, some of these Yardstick presets, and then actually see what they do, and then check out all of the options, because that will kind of show you what some of the presets are actually doing and what that actually sounds like when you hit your play button. That one's kind of cool. Finally, if you've set your room sound and you're like, yes, this is what I want a lot of my tracks to go through, you can then go and add other tracks to it. So let's show you how we do that with, say, a drum track. So I'm going to come here and let's solo this snare so that we can hear what this sounds like. Not bad, but what if we want this snare to go through that same room sound as our guitar and our vocals so that we can kind of glue our mix together? Well, we can do that using the send that we set up before. So I'm going to tap on the mixer icon, grab this bar and bring it up so that we can see what we're doing. And here on this snare channel, what I'm going to do is drag down until we get up to here. You can see this is already going out to our Reverb Buss, but if we want this to go to that Quantec bus, we just hit the plus button, tap on bus, tap on Quantec, and then we can actually send this. So let's just again send 100% of this out to our Quantec bus, and let's take a listen to our snare now. So if you want those nice, slappy, snappy snare sounds, or you want like a big booming room for your sounds, and of course you can do this same process with any of your drums, with your bass if you want to, with keys, with synth sounds, all just here using that one bus, and you can again choose how much you want of each sent out there so that you get the perfect optimal mix. Don't need no grudges on my launch pad. There you have it, the Quantec Room Simulator in action. Vocals, guitars, drums, it can do it all. You can put it on your buses, you can play around with it and use it to enhance all of your tracks. If you'd like to learn more about how to use this and a heap of other features in Logic Pro for iPad, check out the other videos in the description, and I'll see you next time.